There is a strange kind of power that most people never notice. It does not come from shouting, threatening, or dominating a room with force. In fact, it often appears as the opposite of those things. It is quiet, it is still, and yet it terrifies people more than aggression ever could. This power reveals itself in a moment that everyone has experienced, but few have understood. Someone insults you. Someone tries to provoke you. Someone wants to drag you into a fight, emotional or otherwise. And instead of reacting, instead of defending yourself, instead of raising your voice, you simply remain calm. The air changes instantly. The person who expected chaos suddenly finds themselves alone inside it. Most people live their entire lives as emotional mirrors. Someone smiles at them and they smile back. Someone shouts and they shout louder. Someone criticizes them and they explode with anger or collapse into defensiveness. Their emotional state is not truly their own. It is rented space inside their nervous system, controlled by whoever presses the right button. One sarcastic remark, one insult, one challenge to their ego, and suddenly their biology is hijacked. Their heart rate accelerates, their voice rises, their logic disappears. They become predictable. And predictability is the first weakness Machiavelli warned about. When Machiavelli studied power in Renaissance courts, he did not just observe armies and politics. He observed something much more subtle: human reactions. He noticed that the most dangerous men in those courts were rarely the loudest or the most aggressive. Instead, they were the men who almost never reacted emotionally. When insulted, they listened quietly. When threatened, they watched calmly. When provoked, they refused to give their opponent the satisfaction of seeing them moved. These men understood something that the rest of the court did not. Reaction is surrender. The moment you react emotionally to someone's provocation, you have already accepted the rules of the game they created. They wanted your attention, and you gave it to them. They wanted your anger, and you delivered it. They wanted to move your internal state, and suddenly they have control over your nervous system. It does not matter if you win the argument afterward. In that first moment, the moment your emotions spike, you have already revealed something important about yourself. You can be controlled. The manipulation of human emotion has always been one of the oldest strategies in the game of power. Long before modern psychology described neural pathways or emotional triggers, experienced observers understood a simple principle. If you can make a person angry, you can make them stupid. Anger narrows perception. It compresses the mind into a tunnel where only the threat exists and everything else disappears. Strategy vanishes, long-term thinking vanishes, patience vanishes. What remains is raw impulse, and impulse is easy to predict. This is why the person who provokes you is rarely interested in the argument itself. They are interested in the reaction. The insult is not the weapon. The reaction is the weapon. Once they see that reaction, once they see the anger rise in your face or hear it in your voice, they know exactly how to guide the next move. You have entered their frame, their emotional territory, and inside that territory, they control the environment. But something fascinating happens when a person refuses to react. Imagine two individuals standing in the same confrontation. One person shouts, insults, and pushes emotionally, expecting the usual response. They expect anger. They expect defense. They expect some sign that their words landed successfully. Instead, they encounter silence, calm eyes, a relaxed posture. No raised voice, no defensive explanation, no emotional spike. The aggressor suddenly feels something unexpected: uncertainty. Human beings rely heavily on emotional feedback during social interactions. We constantly read faces, tone, and posture to measure the impact of our behavior. When someone removes that feedback, when they remain emotionally neutral in a situation that normally triggers reactions, the aggressor loses their map. They cannot tell whether they succeeded or failed. They cannot predict the next move. And suddenly, the person who is trying to control the interaction feels strangely exposed. Machiavelli understood that uncertainty is one of the most powerful forms of psychological pressure. People are comfortable when they can read you. They relax when they know exactly how you will react. If they insult you and you explode, they know the script. If they challenge you and you defend yourself nervously, they know the script. But when you refuse to react in the expected way, the script collapses. This is the dark psychology of never reacting. It is not about suppressing emotion like a statue pretending to be human. It is about maintaining sovereignty over your internal state. The calm person in a conflict is not empty of emotion. They simply refuse to let external chaos dictate their internal chemistry. They understand that anger is not proof of strength. It is proof that someone else found the key to your nervous system. Once you understand this, something begins to change in the way you view provocation. Instead of seeing an insult as a personal attack, you begin to see it as a test. Someone is probing the edges of your emotional boundary. They want to know whether you can be moved easily or whether your internal state is stable. Most people fail this test immediately because their ego demands instant defense. The ego believes that every criticism must be corrected and every insult must be punished. But Machiavelli would have considered that ego a liability. The ego is loud, fragile, and easily manipulated. It constantly demands recognition and validation from the outside world. Because of that demand, it gives strangers enormous power. Anyone who questions the ego's image can instantly provoke a reaction. Anyone who challenges the ego's narrative can instantly create anger. And so, the man who is ruled by his ego spends his life dancing to the rhythm of other people's provocations. The man who abandons that dependency becomes something else entirely. When he hears an insult, he does not rush to defend himself because his identity is not constructed from the opinions of the person speaking. When someone attempts to provoke him, he does not treat the moment as a battle for dignity. Instead, he treats it as information. Why is this person trying to provoke me? What are they hoping to gain from this reaction? What insecurity or frustration are they projecting into the room? In other words, he becomes an observer instead of a participant, and the observer always has the advantage. There is a fascinating shift that occurs the moment you stop reacting automatically. Conversations slow down. Situations that once felt explosive suddenly feel manageable. Instead of being dragged through emotional turbulence, you begin to watch it unfold from a distance. You notice how easily other people lose control when someone touches their ego. You notice how predictable their behavior becomes once anger enters the room. And gradually you realize something that changes your entire perception of power. The strongest person in a confrontation is not the loudest voice, it is the calmest mind. The moment you stop reacting emotionally, you begin to notice something that most people miss entirely. Provocation is rarely about you, it is about control. People provoke reactions because reactions give them information and leverage. The instant you become angry, defensive, or desperate to explain yourself, the other person learns exactly how to move you. They discover where your emotional pressure points are. They see which words cause your voice to rise and which accusations cause your logic to collapse. In that moment, they are not just arguing with you, they are studying you. Machiavelli observed this dynamic constantly in the courts of Florence and Rome. Rivals would insult one another publicly, not necessarily to win the argument, but to measure the emotional stability of their opponent. A man who reacted instantly revealed his weaknesses to the entire room. His enemies knew they had found a lever. They knew that by pressing the same button again in the future, they could produce the same reaction. But the man who refused to react created a completely different atmosphere. His calm forced everyone around him to confront uncertainty. Was he offended? Was he amused? Was he planning something? No one could tell. And because no one could tell, no one could easily manipulate him. This is why emotional neutrality can feel so unsettling to the people around you. Human beings rely on predictable emotional signals to navigate social situations. When those signals disappear, the environment becomes unstable. The aggressor who expected a dramatic reaction suddenly finds himself exposed in his own emotional chaos. Think about how strange it looks when one person is shouting while the other remains calm. The shouting person begins to look irrational, even if his argument originally contained some truth. His emotional intensity undermines his credibility. Meanwhile, the calm person, even if he says very little, begins to appear composed, thoughtful, and powerful. This shift in perception happens almost automatically. People instinctively associate calmness with authority. A surgeon performing a difficult operation cannot afford to panic. A pilot flying through turbulence cannot afford to scream. In every situation where high stakes are involved, composure becomes the signal that someone is capable of handling pressure. Machiavelli understood that social power operates under the same principle. The person who maintains control over his emotional state during conflict signals something profound to everyone watching. He signals that his identity is not fragile. He signals that his decisions are guided by calculation rather than impulse. And most importantly, he signals that attempts to provoke him will fail. Once people learn that they cannot provoke you easily, something interesting happens. Many of them stop trying. Not because they suddenly respect you in a moral sense, but because the tactic has stopped producing results. Provocation only works when it generates reaction. When reaction disappears, the strategy becomes useless. The aggressor must either escalate into irrational behavior or abandon the attempt entirely. This is where the dark psychology of never reacting reveals its deeper layer. Silence becomes a weapon. Most people are uncomfortable with silence during conflict. They rush to fill it with explanations, apologies, or arguments. They feel an almost physical pressure to justify themselves. But that pressure is exactly what manipulators rely on. When you begin explaining yourself defensively, you place yourself inside their frame. You allow them to decide what accusations deserve answers. The person who remains silent refuses to accept that frame. Silence communicates something powerful without using a single word. It communicates that the accusation is not significant enough to deserve your emotional investment. It communicates that you are thinking rather than reacting, and it communicates that the person attempting to provoke you does not control the tempo of the interaction. Tempo is another concept Machiavelli understood well. Whoever controls the tempo of a conversation controls the emotional environment. The person who forces rapid reactions traps others in impulsive behavior. The person who slows the interaction down forces others to think more carefully. When you pause before responding, when you let silence exist for a few seconds before speaking, you shift the rhythm of the interaction. Suddenly, the aggressor is the one feeling pressure. They begin wondering what you're thinking. They begin replaying their own words in their mind, searching for a mistake. And often they start talking more than they intended. This is one of the most overlooked advantages of remaining calm during conflict. People reveal far more information when they feel uncertain about how you will respond. They begin explaining themselves, adding details, defending statements that you never challenged. In their effort to regain control of the situation, they often expose their real motivations. The observer learns more in silence than the reactor ever learns in anger. But reaching this level of composure requires confronting something uncomfortable about human psychology. Most anger is not triggered by the words themselves. It is triggered by the ego's need for validation. The ego constantly asks the world a question. Do you see me the way I want to be seen? When someone challenges that image, the ego interprets the challenge as a threat. It demands immediate defense because it believes that allowing the criticism to stand will somehow damage your identity. Yet identity doesn't actually work that way. Your character is not defined by the opinions of strangers. Your competence is not erased by someone attempting to belittle you. These things exist independently of the noise surrounding them. Once you truly understand that, insults begin to lose their emotional charge. They start sounding less like attacks and more like signals about the person delivering them. A person who constantly insults others is revealing something about his own insecurity. A person who relies on provocation as a strategy is revealing something about his own lack of influence. Instead of feeling threatened by these behaviors, you begin to recognize them as symptoms. And symptoms rarely deserve anger. They deserve observation. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire while studying Stoic philosophy, described this mindset with remarkable clarity. When confronted with difficult or hostile people, he reminded himself that their behavior was the result of ignorance about what is good and what is harmful. They acted the way they did because they didn't understand a better way to act. From that perspective, anger becomes unnecessary. You do not become furious at a storm for raining. You do not become furious at fire for being hot. These things behave according to their nature. In the same way, people with poor emotional discipline behave according to theirs. Once you see that pattern, reacting with anger begins to feel almost irrational. Why surrender your inner stability to someone who has already demonstrated a lack of control over their own behavior? The moment you adopt this mindset consistently, the social world begins to change around you. People who once attempted to provoke you start treating you differently. Some become more respectful because they realize that their usual tactics will not work. Others drift away because they are no longer able to extract emotional reactions from you. Both outcomes serve the same purpose. They simplify your environment. The individuals who remain around you tend to be those who value calm discussion rather than emotional chaos. The individuals who relied on drama gradually lose interest when the drama stops producing results. This is the quiet power of emotional sovereignty. You are not forcing people to behave differently. You are simply refusing to participate in behaviors that reduce your clarity. By maintaining control over your reactions, you remove the incentive for others to provoke you in the first place. And in doing so, you accomplish something far more important than winning arguments. You protect your focus. Focus is one of the most valuable resources a person possesses. Every moment spent in anger is a moment diverted from building something meaningful in your own life. Every argument fueled by ego is time lost to a battle that rarely produces anything constructive. The person who learns to remain calm in the face of provocation gains a powerful advantage. While others exhaust themselves in endless cycles of emotional conflict, he continues moving forward. His attention remains available for the goals that actually matter. This is why Machiavelli believed emotional discipline was not simply a moral virtue, it was a strategic advantage. A man who cannot be provoked easily cannot be distracted easily, and a man who cannot be distracted easily becomes extremely difficult to defeat. If you reach the point where insults feel like noise, where provocation where provocation feels like a test you no longer feel obligated to take, and where silence feels more powerful than argument, you will notice something remarkable. The world becomes quieter. The conflicts that once consumed your energy begin to fade into the background. People who once seemed intimidating begin to look predictable. Situations that once triggered anger begin to look like small disturbances in a much larger landscape. You begin to realize that the greatest victory in most conflicts is not defeating the other person. It is refusing to let them control your state of mind. That is the dark psychology of never reacting. It is not about becoming cold or indifferent to life. It is about choosing carefully which battles deserve your energy and which ones deserve nothing at all. Because the moment you stop reacting to every provocation, you stop living inside other people's emotional storms, and you start living inside your own control. If this perspective changed how you see anger, provocation, and emotional power, write in the comments, "I stay calm." And if you want more insights into the strategic thinking of Machiavelli, the Stoics, and the hidden dynamics of human behavior, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the loudest person in the room rarely holds the real power. The person who controls himself always does.